Bob Kolaski is Exiger Senior Vice President for Critical Infrastructure. He's also the former Assistant Director for Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security, the agency that is inside the Department of Homeland Security. And Bob, what evidence is there that the Chinese government has access to our data?
Well, I think the evidence comes through, you were talking about with Direct Array, the clip you just pulled for Direct Array, that the Chinese government has access to request questions from TikTok, for TikTok to give what data TikTok has, ByteDance to give the TikTok data. And so the evidence is that the app itself collects data as part of what it does to run the app, right, to the algorithms and the like, to make preferences for viewers and that information is available. And we've seen evidence in 2022 of journalists who were using TikTok, and that information got to ByteDance, and ByteDance gave that information to the Chinese government. And so there is evidence that both the government has the authorities to request the data from ByteDance, and that ByteDance collects data through TikTok, because that's how TikTok more effectively delivers content to its users. So it's a connected the dot question.
Yeah, data is data. So why should I be more concerned in this case about the Chinese than I am about anybody else that collects my data? Because the truth of the matter is I get alerts from different companies in this country telling me things that I need that I didn't know I need, but I look at them and I say, that really is something that I need. I know that they're mining my data.
Well, I mean, first of all, there's a personal preference of how companies use your data, right? And you have some ability to make decisions of what data you make available to the companies you use. But you're absolutely right. Data is proliferate. People say that data is the new oil, and data is out there, and lots of our personal data is out there. What's happening here in this case is that this is a foreign country, which, I think is, doing things that one would call adversarial, that's collecting information on American citizens in this case, and that information that they get from American citizens they can use for different means. And what Congress is trying to do is set up a higher wall of data that the Chinese government can get on American citizens in case that, at times the Chinese government is going to use that data for nefarious reasons. And so, it's plugging a hole and minimizing the risk that exists right now. And that's what's trying to be done through this legislation.
Bob, China is a pretty big country. The world is a pretty big place. Lots of people are thinking right now, I'm not that big a fish, to tell you the truth, in this pond. Why should I be concerned about my own personal data? Oh, you're smiling. Explain to me why that is the case. Why should I be concerned?
Well, I mean, you should be concerned, first of all, that, there's the propaganda use, right? There is the use that the Chinese government, for propaganda reasons, will be mining data, looking for ways to push messages into the hands of you or, one of your loved ones or somebody that you care about, and trying to target messages to cause question belief systems that are fundamental to the United States. So that's a little bit of what the propaganda concern is around there. In terms of actually the data privacy issues, economic data, health data, location data, that kind of data is something that we want to protect ourselves from a foreign country using that for bad purposes. You're absolutely right that there's a lot of people in China. There are a lot of people here, and it's not necessarily an individual risk, but it becomes a collective risk.
And so, Bob, what about TikTok that poses the national security threat? Is it the username and password, or the stuff that folks post that they want to collect data on?
Well, I think what it is about TikTok is its preferences of how consumers are using the app, and then delivering messages to consumers who are using the app in a micro-targeted format. We saw this a little bit with what the Russian government did in 2016 to influence our election in 2016. The Chinese government could do the same thing through TikTok that the Russian government did through through Facebook at the time there, where it's micro-targeting of messaging to push different to push things that will get to people's different belief systems there. And then there's questions of basic health data and basic preference data that it gets collected via TikTok that can be used in an aggregate form to sow some level of disruption or do something worse.
Bob, how concerned should we be that today's ally is tomorrow's enemy, or today's enemy is tomorrow's ally? Because if TikTok is sold, what's to stop, for instance, the Saudis from buying it, or the Russians? And think about it. There is a possibility that if Russia buys it and the elections go one way, that will be viewed differently than if the elections go another way.
Well, the legislation is set up to have some restrictions over who would buy it and have a review period to make sure that any purchase to keep TikTok viable would not be done by a foreign government that couldn't get approval of the United States government through the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States process, the CFIUS process. So there are protections in place that are connected to this legislation so that the Saudi government or the Russian government wouldn't be able to buy it, or companies there would get a good deal of scrutiny, and it could be blocked through a CFIUS transaction there. In terms of the question of, do countries that were allies with now change? There's certainly an element that happens, but the process should be set up to make sure that there are protections in place, that whoever owns TikTok is following a rule set to not allow U.S. consumers' information to be used for nefarious purposes.
Bob, final question before we go to break. Don't want to put you on the spot, but you know the old saying, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Are we doing it to them?
Are we
collecting data on foreign adversaries with some?
No, we have data protections. We operate. No, our companies do not have the same, don't operate in the same legal structure. They're not giving information to the U.S. government. They're not required to give information to the U.S. government based on information that businesses that they do overseas. We don't, as a government, have the right to ask for that information and collect it wholesale, nor do we have the level of influence nor does the U.S. government have the level of influence over American tech companies that the Chinese government has over their tech companies, whether it's ByteDance and TikTok or Alibaba or Tencent and the like. And so the laws are certainly different, and we can review that. And then the operation principles and the privacy protections that our agencies operate under, and the civil rights and civil liberties protections that our agencies operate under that are based on our Constitution are not the same that the Chinese government operates under.
Hey, Bob, stick around because we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, if you think you're worried about TikTok, wait until you find out about your car. Could the technology in your car be compromised? Why research found vehicles are considered the worst when it comes to our privacy. We're going to continue our conversation with Bob when we come right back. Stay with us.